The great chamber was silent. Elena Vasquez stood alone in the center of a room that could hold 10,000 beings. The walls were made of something that looked like crystal, but was harder than any metal humans had ever created. Light came from everywhere and nowhere at once. The ceiling stretched so high above her that she could barely see it. Around her, arranged in a massive circle that rose upward like the inside of a bowl, sat the representatives of the 12 elder species of the galaxy. They had ruled these stars for longer than humans had existed as a species. Some of them had been traveling between worlds when humanity's ancestors were still learning to make fire. Elena was 47 years old. She had spent her entire adult life working toward this moment. First as a diplomat on Mars, then as an ambassador to the first alien species humanity had ever contacted, and finally as the official voice of all humanity before the Galactic Council. She had believed, truly believed, that today would be the day humanity was welcomed into galactic civilization. She had been wrong. The Valkyrie, High Arbiter, rose from her seat. Her skin glowed with a soft blue light that pulsed with her heartbeat. Her eyes were completely black, like two pools of ink set into a face that was almost human, but not quite. The Valkyrie were the oldest of the elder species. They had founded the Galactic Council 6,000 years ago. Their word was law. "We have heard the arguments," the High Arbiter said. Her voice was soft, but it carried through the entire chamber without any amplification. "We have considered the evidence. We have consulted with every member species. The Council has reached a unanimous decision." Elena felt her heart beating faster. She forced herself to stand straight and keep her face calm. Behind her, watching through cameras that broadcast to every human world, billions of people held their breath. Humanity is too dangerous to be permitted entry into galactic civilization. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She had prepared for many outcomes. She had prepared for conditions, for restrictions, for a probationary period. She had not prepared for this. "The evidence is clear," the High Arbiter continued. "In less than 100 years since achieving faster than light travel, your species has colonized 17 star systems. You have built military vessels that rival those of species who have existed for millennia. You breed at rates that would overwhelm any world within generations. You carry violence in your blood like a disease." Elena wanted to speak, to defend her people, but the rules of the Council were absolute. The accused could not interrupt a verdict. "We have watched your history," the High Arbiter said. "Your species has been at war with itself for your entire existence. You have created weapons capable of destroying your own world, not once but many times over. You have committed atrocities against your own kind that shock even the Korath, who are themselves a warrior species." From his seat high above, the Korath representative let out a sound that might have been agreement. The Korath were large beings, covered in thick scales and natural armor. They had conquered a dozen species before joining the Council. Even they had looked down on humanity. "And then there is the incident at Proxima Station," the High Arbiter said. 3 Korath enforcement officers, acting under Council authority, attempted to board a human vessel, suspected of carrying illegal technology. Your captain killed all 3 of them with his bare hands. Elena remembered that incident. Captain James Morrison had been transporting medical supplies to a colony suffering from a plague. The Korath officers had demanded he surrender his cargo for inspection, a process that would have taken weeks. People were dying. Morrison had refused. When the Korath tried to board by force, Morrison had fought back. He was considered a hero on every human world. The Council saw him as proof of human savagery. "Humanity cannot be trusted," the High Arbiter said. "You are too young, too aggressive, too unpredictable. Perhaps in 1,000 years, when your species has matured, we might reconsider. But for now, The Council has decided that humanity must be removed from civilized space. Elena finally found her voice. Removed? What do you mean, removed? You will be exiled, the High Arbiter said. There was no emotion in her voice. She might have been discussing the weather. Humanity is hereby banished to the terminus expanse, beyond the galactic rim. You will have 50 cycles, approximately 50 of your Earth years, to evacuate all human presence from Council space. Any human found within our borders, after that time, will be executed on sight. The chamber erupted in sounds of approval from the gathered representatives. The Korath stamped their feet. The Dazari, beings of pure energy contained in crystalline forms, flickered in what might have been applause. Only a few species remained silent, but none spoke against the verdict. This is a death sentence, Elena said. Her voice was steady, but inside she was screaming. The terminus expanse is a wasteland. Dead stars, barren rocks, no habitable worlds for light years in any direction. You are condemning 20 billion people to slow extinction. That is not our concern, the High Arbiter replied. Your species has proven itself unworthy of existence among civilized beings. What happens to you in the expanse is your own affair. Perhaps you will survive. Perhaps you will not. Either way, you will no longer be a threat to the peace and stability of the galaxy. Elena looked around the chamber. She looked at the Velthari with their glowing skin. She looked at the Korath with their armored bodies. She looked at the dozens of other species, each one ancient beyond human comprehension, each one looking at her with contempt or indifference or something worse than either. She had come here with hope. She had come here believing that the galaxy was big enough for everyone, that humanity's energy and creativity would be welcomed, that the elder species would see humans as potential friends and partners. Instead, she had found only fear and prejudice, dressed up in the language of law and order. Something changed in Elena Vasquez in that moment. Something that had been soft became hard. Something that had been hopeful became cold. May I speak? She asked. The verdict has been delivered, the High Arbiter said. There is nothing more to discuss. I am not asking to appeal, Elena said. I am asking to respond, as is my right under your own laws. Or does the Council fear the words of a primitive human? The High Arbiter's black eyes narrowed. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she nodded once. You may speak, briefly. Elena turned in a slow circle, making sure to meet the eyes of as many representatives as she could. Her words would be heard on every human world. They would be recorded in every human history. She had to make them count. 1,200 years ago, she began, my species lived in caves and hunted with sticks and stones. 600 years ago, we had not yet developed the printing press. 300 years ago, we had not yet split the atom. 100 years ago, we had not yet set foot on our own moon. She paused to let those numbers sink in. In the span of time it takes a Velthari child to learn to walk. Humanity went from living in dirt to reaching the stars. You call us dangerous. You are right. We are dangerous. We are the most dangerous species this galaxy has ever seen. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Korath representative leaned forward, his small eyes fixed on Elena with new interest. But we did not come here as conquerors, Elena continued. We came here as students, as traders, as friends. We offered you our art, our music, our stories. We offered you our science, our medicine, our technology. We offered you everything we had, asking only for a place among you. Her voice grew harder. And you answered with exile. You answered by condemning 20 billion innocent people to death in the cold dark between galaxies. Not because of anything we have done to you, but because of what we might do. Because you looked at our potential and you were afraid. The High Arbiter started to speak. But Elena raised her hand. I am not finished. To her own surprise, The High Arbiter fell silent. "You have made a mistake today," Elena said. "The greatest mistake in the history of your council. You had the chance to make humanity your ally. You had the chance to channel our energy, our creativity, our drive toward building something greater than any of us could build alone. Instead, you chose to make us your enemy." She turned to face the High Arbiter directly. "My people will go to the terminus expanse, as you have commanded. We will obey your verdict, because we are not the savages you believe us to be. But we will not die quietly in the dark. We will not fade away and be forgotten. We will survive. We will grow. We will remember." Elena's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, but it carried through the entire chamber. "And one day, when you have forgotten that humanity ever existed, we will return. On that day, you will learn why you should have made us your friends instead of your enemies. On that day, you will understand what it truly means to be afraid." She turned and walked toward the exit. Her footsteps echoed in the sudden silence. "This session is concluded," the High Arbiter announced, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. "Humanity is hereby exiled. Let the record show that the decision was unanimous." Elena did not look back. The news spread across human space faster than light itself. On Earth, billions of people watched the verdict in shock and disbelief. On Mars, workers in the great terraforming stations stopped their machines and stared at screens in silent horror. On the colony worlds of Alpha Centauri, Tau Ceti, and a dozen other stars, humans gathered in the streets and waited to hear what would happen next. Elena's ship carried her back to Earth in 3 days. She spent most of that time in her cabin, alone, thinking. By the time she arrived, she had a plan. The leaders of Earth's nations had already gathered. Presidents and prime ministers, chancellors and premiers, all of them united for the first time in human history by a common enemy. They waited for Elena in the Great Assembly Hall of the United Earth Government, a building that had been constructed specifically for humanity's entry into the galactic community. Now it would serve a different purpose. "They have given us 50 years, Elena told them. 50 years to move 20 billion people to a region of space where no one has ever lived. 50 years to build new homes on dead worlds around dying stars. 50 years to either survive or perish." She looked at the faces around her. She saw fear. She saw anger. She saw despair. But she also saw something else, something that gave her hope. She saw determination. "The Council believes this sentence is a death penalty," Elena continued. "They believe we will fight among ourselves, that we will waste our remaining years in pointless conflict, that we will arrive in the terminus expanse broken and divided and ready to die." She smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "They do not know us. They do not understand what humanity is capable of when we are united by a common cause. They look at our history of war and see only savagery. They do not see that we have always been at our best when our backs are against the wall, when survival itself hangs in the balance." She activated the holographic display behind her. A map of the galaxy appeared, with human space highlighted in blue and the terminus expanse marked in red at the very edge. "We have 50 years, she said. "That is not much time, but it is enough. Enough to move our people. Enough to build new homes. Enough to prepare for what comes next." The President of the United Americas spoke up. "What exactly do you mean by what comes next, Ambassador?" Elena turned to face him. "The Council has made their intentions clear. They see humanity as a threat to be eliminated. Even if we go quietly into exile, even if we give them no reason to fear us, they will eventually come to finish what they started. They cannot allow a species as dangerous as ours to exist, not even in the wasteland they have condemned us to." She paused. "So we have a choice. We can spend our exile waiting to die, hoping that the Council will forget about us or change their minds. Or we can use the time they have given us to prepare, to build, to grow strong enough that when they finally come for us, they will find not the broken remnants of a dying species, but something far more dangerous. You are talking about war, the Chancellor of Europa said. War against species that have been traveling between stars for thousands of years. War against enemies who outnumber us 100 to 1. I am talking about survival, Elena replied. The Council has declared that humanity has no right to exist. I say we prove them wrong. I say we take everything they have given us, the exile, the isolation, the death sentence, and we turn it into strength. I say we use these 50 years not to prepare for death, but to prepare for the day when we return to Council space and demand the respect that was denied to us today. The room was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the President of the Pan-African Union rose to his feet. I speak for 3 billion people, he said. 3 billion people who have been told they are not worthy of living among the stars. 3 billion people who have been condemned to die in darkness by species who have never known hardship, never known struggle, never known what it means to fight for survival. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of his fellow leaders. My ancestors survived slavery. They survived colonization. They survived centuries of oppression and discrimination. And they emerged stronger for it every time. If the Council believes that exile will break humanity, they have not been paying attention to our history. One by one, the other leaders rose to their feet. They came from different nations, different cultures, different backgrounds. They had spent centuries fighting each other over resources and territory and ideology. But in that moment, they were united as humanity had never been united before. We accept the exile, Elena said. We will leave Council space within the time they have allowed. We will obey their laws and their verdicts. But we will not accept defeat. We will not accept death. We will not accept that humanity's story ends in a graveyard of dead stars at the edge of the galaxy. She raised her hand, and the other leaders raised theirs. Today, we begin the greatest project in human history. Today, we begin building not just new homes, but a new humanity. Stronger, smarter, more unified than we have ever been. And when the Council finally comes to see what their exile has created, they will wish they had shown us mercy when they had the chance. The exodus began the next day. Ships that had been built for exploration were converted to carry colonists. Factories that had been producing consumer goods switched to manufacturing survival equipment. Scientists who had been studying alien technology began working on ways to make human technology better. 50 years was not much time, but humanity had never needed much time to accomplish the impossible. As the first wave of ships left Earth orbit, heading for the distant darkness of the terminus expanse, Elena Vasquez watched from her office window. She was old enough to know that she would probably not live to see humanity's return to Council space. But she had planted the seed. She had given her people a purpose. The Council had tried to bury humanity in the darkness between stars. They did not know that they had only planted a seed, and that from that seed would grow something terrible and beautiful and unstoppable. They would learn. In time, they would all learn. 50 years had passed since the exile. Admiral Marcus Chun stood on the observation deck of Forge Station, the largest structure humanity had ever built. It hung in the void between two dead stars, a massive wheel of metal and light that stretched for nearly 100 kilometers in every direction. Around it, like children gathered around their mother, floated dozens of smaller stations and hundreds of ships in various stages of construction. Marcus was 63 years old. He had been 13 when the exile began, old enough to remember Earth, but young enough to have spent most of his life in the terminus expanse. His father had been a shipyard worker on Mars. His mother had been a teacher. Both had died during the long transit, the terrible journey that had carried humanity from their homes to this wasteland at the edge of the galaxy. Nearly 2 billion people had died during those first years. The cold of space, the failure of life support systems, the despair that drove some to take their own lives, all of it had taken its toll. Of the 20 billion humans who had begun the exodus, only 18 billion had survived to reach the terminus expanse. But they had survived. And they had kept their promise. "Admiral," a voice said behind him. Marcus turned to see his executive officer, Commander Sarah Williams, approaching. She was young, only 32, born in the expanse to parents who had never known any home but the darkness. The construction crews report that the Defiance will be ready for final testing by the end of the week. Marcus nodded. The Defiance was the first of a new class of warship, designed from the ground to fight the elder species of the galaxy. It was larger than any vessel humanity had ever built, more heavily armed, more heavily armored. But more important than its size was its technology done in the 50 years since the Exile. Human scientists had not been idle. Cut off from galactic trade, they had been forced to develop their own solutions to every problem. They had taken the few pieces of alien technology they had managed to bring with them and studied them until they understood not just how they worked, but why they worked. Then they had improved upon them. The drives that powered the Defiance were 3 times faster than anything the Council species used. Its weapons could punch through shields that had been designed to stop attacks from vessels that existed 1,000 years ago. Its armor was made from materials that did not exist in nature, created in laboratories by scientists who had spent decades pushing the boundaries of physics. "Good," Marcus said. "What about the training simulations?" "Fleet readiness is at 94%, Sarah replied. "The crews are eager, Admiral. They've been waiting for this their entire lives." Marcus understood that eagerness. Every human born in the Terminus Expanse had grown up on stories of the exile, of the injustice that had been done to their grandparents and great-grandparents. They had been raised to remember, to hate, to prepare. The Council had hoped that exile would break humanity's spirit. Instead, it had forged that spirit into something harder than steel. "The Council believes we are dying out here," Marcus said, looking out at the construction yards. Their scouts occasionally passed through the edges of the expanse, looking for signs of human activity. They find abandoned stations, drifting wrecks, evidence of failure and decay. He smiled grimly. "They find exactly what we want them to find." It had been Elena Vasquez's idea, implemented in the early years of the exile and continued ever since. Whenever Council scouts approached, humans would retreat to hidden bases deep within the most inhospitable regions of the expanse. They would leave behind decoys, empty stations, damaged ships, recordings of distress calls that would never be answered. The Council species believed that humanity was slowly dying, as they had intended. They believed that the exile had succeeded, that the dangerous humans were no longer a threat. They had stopped paying attention decades ago. They had no idea what was really happening in the darkness. Marcus turned away from the window and walked with Sarah toward the command center. Along the way, they passed through corridors filled with people, engineers, soldiers, scientists, civilians. All of them wore the uniform of the Terran Dominion, the government that had emerged in the early years of the exile to unite all of humanity under a single banner. The Dominion was not a democracy, not in the way the old Earth governments had been. It was a meritocracy where advancement was based solely on ability and dedication. The best rose to the top, regardless of where they came from or who their parents had been. The inefficient, the corrupt, the lazy, they were weeded out and assigned to tasks better suited to their abilities. Some had called it harsh. Some had called it unfair. But no one could argue with the results. In 50 years, Humanity had gone from a scattered collection of refugees to a unified civilization, spanning hundreds of hidden bases throughout the terminus expanse. They had built shipyards and factories, farms and hospitals, schools and universities. They had raised a generation that knew nothing but the goal of survival and eventual return. The command center was a massive room, filled with screens and holographic displays. Officers monitored everything from ship movements to resource allocation to intelligence, gathered from the occasional scout who managed to slip into council space undetected. "Show me the latest intelligence reports," Marcus ordered. A holographic map appeared in the center of the room. It showed the galaxy as humanity's spies had mapped it, with council space marked in blue and the terminus expanse in red. Between them was a vast buffer zone, patrolled by council ships and defended by automated weapons platforms. The Korath have been increasing their military presence along the border, one of the intelligence officers reported. "They appear to be concerned about something, though we are not sure what." Marcus studied the map. The Korath were the most aggressive of the council species, the ones who had been most eager to see humanity exiled. They were also the nearest to the terminus expanse, their empire stretching along the border like a wall. "They should be concerned," Marcus said quietly. "In a few more years, they will understand why." The plan had been developed decades ago, in the early years of the exile. Humanity could not simply charge back into council space and expect to win. Even with their technological advantages, they were outnumbered by a factor of hundreds to one. A direct confrontation would lead to their destruction. Instead, they would be patient. They would wait until the time was right, until their forces were strong enough and the council's attention was elsewhere. Then they would strike at the weakest point, taking territory and resources that would allow them to grow even stronger. They would expand slowly, carefully, always staying one step ahead of the council's response. It was a strategy that required patience, discipline, and faith. Faith that the sacrifices of the past would be rewarded. Faith that humanity's children would complete what their grandparents had started. Faith that one day the council would pay for what they had done. Marcus had that faith. Every human in the terminus expanse had it. "Admiral," Sarah said, "there is something else you should see." She led him to a smaller room adjacent to the command center. Inside, a team of scientists was gathered around a complex piece of machinery that pulsed with a soft blue light. "What is this?" Marcus asked. One of the scientists, an elderly woman named Dr. Yuki Tanaka, stepped forward. She was one of the oldest humans still alive, old enough to remember the exile itself. Her hair was completely white, her face lined with wrinkles, but her eyes were sharp and bright. "This is the culmination of 50 years of research," she said. "We have finally cracked the secret of Velthari shield technology." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. The Velthari were the most advanced of the council species, their technology the most sophisticated. Their shields were legendary, capable of stopping any attack. No weapon in the known galaxy could penetrate them. "Explain," he said. Dr. Tanaka activated a holographic display showing the structure of a Velthari shield. "The council species have been using the same shield technology for thousands of years," she said. "They improved it gradually, making it stronger and more efficient, but the basic principles remain the same. Why change something that works?" She smiled, and there was a fierce pride in that smile. But they made a mistake. They assumed that no one would ever develop weapons based on fundamentally different principles. They became complacent, relying on shields that had protected them for millennia. She pointed to a part of the display. "We have developed a weapon that does not try to overpower the shield. Instead, it disrupts the field generators themselves. It causes the shield to collapse from within, leaving the target completely vulnerable." Marcus stared at the display. He understood the implications immediately. With this technology, human ships could destroy Velthari vessels that had once seemed invincible. The most powerful species in the galaxy would suddenly find themselves defenseless. How long until this can be deployed? He asked.
We have already begun retrofitting the Defiance, Dr. Tanaka replied. Within 6 months, we can have the entire fleet equipped.
Marcus nodded slowly. 50 years of waiting. 50 years of sacrifice and preparation. It was almost over. There is something else, Doctor, Tanaka said. Her voice became softer, more personal. I was there, in that chamber, when the High Arbiter delivered the verdict. I was part of Ambassador Vasquez's staff. Marcus looked at her with new interest. I did not know that. Elena was my friend, Dr. Tanaka continued. She died 10 years into the exile, from a disease we did not yet have the medicine to cure. But before she died, she made me promise something. What did she make you promise? She made me promise that I would live long enough to see humanity return. She made me promise that I would be there when the Council understood their mistake. Dr. Tanaka's eyes glistened with tears that she refused to let fall. I am 97 years old, Admiral. I have outlived my children and most of my grandchildren. I have watched humanity rebuild itself from nothing in this wasteland, and I have kept my promise. I am still here. She straightened her back, and for a moment, Marcus could see the young woman she had once been, standing beside Elena Vasquez in the chamber of the Galactic Council. I intend to be there when we go home. Marcus put his hand on her shoulder. You will be, Doctor. I promise you that. Over the following months, the final preparations accelerated. Ships that had been under construction for years received their finishing touches. Crews that had trained in simulations for decades practiced with real weapons and real targets. Supplies were stockpiled, strategies were refined, and every possible contingency was planned for. Throughout it all, humanity maintained its deception. Council scouts continued to find evidence of decay and failure. Occasional distress signals, carefully crafted to seem authentic, painted a picture of a species in its final death throes. In the hidden depths of the Terminus Expanse, the largest military force humanity had ever assembled waited in the darkness. Marcus spent most of his time reviewing intelligence reports and meeting with his commanders. The Korath would be their first target, chosen not because they were the weakest, they were far from it, but because they were the closest and because they had been among the most eager to see humanity destroyed. There was also a personal element to the choice. The Korath had killed Captain James Morrison 40 years ago, executing him in public as an example to other humans who might think of resisting Council authority. The footage of his death had been broadcast throughout human space, intended to break their spirit. Instead, it had only strengthened their resolve. One night, as Marcus was reviewing the final attack plans, Sarah came to his quarters with a bottle of something that might have been wine. It was made from genetically modified grapes grown on one of the hidden agricultural stations, and it was not particularly good. But it was theirs, made by human hands from human crops, and that gave it a value no imported luxury could match. Tomorrow we begin, Sarah said, pouring 2 glasses. Tomorrow we begin, Marcus agreed. They drank in silence for a moment. Outside the window, the stars of the Terminus Expanse glittered cold and distant. Beyond them, invisible but ever-present, lay the galaxy that had cast humanity out. Do you ever wonder if we are doing the right thing? Sarah asked. Marcus considered the question carefully. The Council gave us a choice, he said finally. Submit or die. We refused to submit, and we refused to die. What else could we do? We could have tried to negotiate. Tried to prove that we are not the monsters they believe us to be. We tried that, Marcus reminded her. Elena Vasquez spent her entire life trying that. The Council did not want negotiation. They did not want proof.
They wanted us gone, and they did not care whether we went quietly or screaming. He set down his glass and looked at his executive. Officer with the eyes of a man who had spent his entire life preparing for war. I do not hate the council species, he said. Not even the Korath. Hate requires too much energy, and we have needed all our energy for other things. But I will not apologize for what we are about to do. The council declared war on humanity the day they exiled us. We are simply finishing what they started. Sarah nodded slowly. The troops are ready. The ships are ready. The weapons are ready. And the people? The people have been ready for 50 years. Marcus smiled, and there was no warmth in it, only determination. Then tomorrow, we stop hiding. Tomorrow, we show the galaxy what humanity has become. Tomorrow, the council learns why they should have killed us when they had the chance. He raised his glass one final time. To humanity. To humanity, Sarah echoed. They drank, and outside the window, the stars waited. In his private quarters, later that night, Marcus found himself looking at a photograph that had been passed down through his family for generations. It showed Earth as seen from orbit blue, and green and beautiful, wrapped in white clouds, floating in the darkness of space. He had never seen Earth himself. The planet had been abandoned during the Exodus, left behind for the council to claim or ignore as they wished. But he had grown up with stories of it, with images of it, with a longing for it that he knew he would never satisfy. We will not go back, he said quietly, speaking to the image as if it could hear him. Earth is lost. The past is lost. But we will build something new, something greater. And we will never let anyone take it from us again. He put the photograph away and went to sleep. Tomorrow would be the first day of humanity's return. Tomorrow, the exile would end. Tomorrow, the war would begin. In the darkness of the terminus expanse, hidden from the eyes of the galaxy, 1,000 ships powered up their engines and prepared to move. In their crews, tens of thousands of humans checked their weapons and reviewed their orders. In command centers across 100 hidden bases, officers watched their screens and waited for the signal. At exactly midnight, ship time, Marcus Chun sent a single message to every human vessel and every human base in the terminus expanse. It contained only 3 words. We are coming. The long dark was over. Now came the fire. The Korath patrol ship Vengeance of the Ancestors drifted through the outer reaches of the Zellner system, its crew bored and restless. They had been assigned to border patrol duty 6 months ago, watching for threats that never came from a species that everyone knew was dying. Commander Krathvar sat in his command chair and stared at the empty void on his screens. The terminus expanse stretched before him, a vast darkness that contained nothing but dead stars and ancient dust. Somewhere in that darkness, the humans were supposedly clinging to life, slowly fading into extinction as the council had intended. Krathvar had fought humans once, decades ago, during the final days of the exile. He remembered them as small, soft creatures, barely worth the effort of killing. The only interesting thing about them had been their refusal to surrender, their insistence on fighting even when victory was impossible. It had been almost admirable in a pathetic sort of way. Now they were gone, or nearly so. Occasional scout reports spoke of abandoned stations and drifting wreckage, of distress calls that went unanswered, and worlds that had been stripped of resources by a desperate, dying people. Some of the younger Korath complained about being assigned to watch over a graveyard, but Krathvar understood the importance of the duty. Until the last human was confirmed dead, the border had to be watched. Commander, his sensor officer said, I am detecting a ship approaching from the expanse. Krathvar sat up slightly. A human ship? It had been years since they had seen one. Most likely another refugee vessel, limping toward council space in hopes of finding mercy that would not be given. One ship? He asked. Yes, Commander. Small, Appears to be a scout-class vessel. Weapons? Minimal. Standard human configuration from the Exile era. Krathvio relaxed. Standard procedure was clear. Destroy any human vessel found in or near Council space. It was almost a kindness, really. A quick death was better than the slow starvation that awaited them in the expanse. Move to intercept, he ordered. Weapons ready. This will be quick. The vengeance of the ancestors was 100 times larger than the human scout ship and armed with weapons that could crack a small moon. The battle, if it could be called that, should be over in seconds. But as they approached, something strange happened. Instead of fleeing or sending desperate pleas for mercy, the human ship turned toward them. It accelerated, moving faster than any human vessel had ever been recorded moving, and headed straight for the Korath patrol ship. "Commander," the sensor officer said, his voice uncertain, "the human vessel is increasing speed." They are attacking us." Krathvior actually laughed. A scout ship attacking a Korath patrol vessel? It was suicide. Brave, perhaps, but utterly pointless. "All weapons, fire at will," he ordered. The vengeance of the ancestors unleashed a barrage that should have vaporized the human ship instantly. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds filled the space between the two vessels. A storm of destruction that nothing should have been able to survive. The human ship did not even slow down. Krathvar watched in disbelief as the tiny vessel dodged through his weapon's fire with impossible agility, moving in ways that should have been physically impossible. Its shields that were supposed to be 50 years out of date deflected the few shots that actually hit it. "Increase fire," Krathvior shouted. "All batteries." More weapons came online, filling space with even more destruction. And still the human ship came on, untouched, unstoppable. And now Krathvior could see that it was charging its own weapons. Weapons that glowed with a strange blue light he had never seen before. The human ship fired once, the vengeance of the ancestors. Pride of the Korath border fleet died in an instant. The blue beam cut through their shields as if they did not exist, passed through their armor like it was made of paper, and struck the ship's reactor. The explosion lit up the darkness of space for a brief moment, then faded into nothing. Commander Krathvior had just enough time to understand that everything he believed about humans was wrong before he ceased to exist. 73 years after the exile, humanity announced its return date within a week. 12 more Korath patrol ships had been destroyed. Within a month, the entire border defense network had gone dark. The Korath scrambled to respond, pulling ships from their interior systems and sending them to the border, but they were too slow. By the time their reinforcements arrived, human forces had already pushed into Korath space. Admiral Yuki Tanaka, granddaughter of the scientist who had cracked Velthari shield technology, commanded the human fleet from the bridge of the Defiance. At 35, she was young for an admiral, but she had proven herself in countless simulations and in the few small engagements that had been fought in the depths of the Terminus Expanse. She was exactly the kind of leader humanity needed: brilliant, ruthless, and completely dedicated to the mission. "Report," she said, studying the tactical display that filled the center of her bridge. "The Korath are falling back to their second defensive line," her operations officer reported. "They are consolidating their forces around the Krath system, their regional military headquarters. Casualties? Minimal on our side. We have lost 4 ships, all to accidents or mechanical failures. Enemy casualties are in the hundreds of vessels." Yuki nodded. The numbers were even better than the projections had suggested. The Korath, like all Council species, had relied on the same technology for thousands of years. They had improved it gradually, making it more efficient and reliable. But the fundamental principles had not changed. Humanity had spent 50 years developing entirely new principles. What about their civilians? Yuki asked. We have secured 3 Karth colony worlds. The populations have been contained but not harmed, as per orders. They seem confused? Confused? They expected us to slaughter them, Admiral. That is what the Korath would do. They do not understand why we have not. Yuki allowed herself a small smile. Send word to the civilian populations. Tell them that the Terran Dominion does not make war on non-combatants. Tell them that if they cooperate, they will be treated fairly. Tell them that we are not the monsters the Council said we were. It was a calculated kindness, but it was also genuine. Humanity had not spent 50 years preparing for revenge. They had spent 50 years preparing for victory, and victory meant more than just killing. It meant building something that would last. The Korath did not understand this. Their culture was built on strength and dominance. When they conquered a species, they enslaved it or destroyed it. The idea that a conqueror might treat the conquered with basic dignity was foreign to them. It was also deeply unsettling. 3 months into the campaign, the Korath High Command sent a message requesting negotiations. Yuki received the delegation on the Defiance, surrounded by human officers who watched the proceedings with cold eyes. The Korath delegate was a senior general named Varkan, a decorated warrior who had fought in a dozen campaigns against other species. He was large even by Korath standards, his scales a deep green that spoke of advanced age and high status. He looked at the humans around him with barely concealed contempt. You have fought well, he said, for primitives. But you must know that you cannot win. The Council will not permit it. If you continue this war, you will be destroyed. Yuki remained seated, her hands folded in her lap. General Viokan, you speak of the Council as if they are coming to save you. Have you contacted them? Have you asked for their help? Vorokan's scales shifted slightly, a sign of discomfort that humans had learned to recognize. The Council will respond when they understand the threat. It is only a matter of time. The Council does not care about you, Yuki said calmly. You are always their attack dogs, the species they used to enforce their will on others. Now that you are the ones being attacked, they will do nothing. They will wait and watch and hope that we exhaust ourselves against you. Then, when we are weak and you are destroyed, they will move in to finish us off. She leaned forward. But we will not be weak. And you will not be destroyed, not completely, at least. You have a choice, General. You can continue fighting a war you cannot win, watching your worlds fall one by one until nothing remains of your empire. Or you can surrender now, accept human governance, and preserve what remains of your species. Vorokan's claws tightened on the arms of his chair. The Korath do not surrender. The Korath have never faced an enemy like us, Yuki replied. You have conquered species that were weaker than you, species that had no choice but to submit or die. But we are not weaker than you. We have better ships, better weapons, better tactics. And we have something you have never had, a reason to fight that goes beyond mere conquest. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. 73 years ago, your species voted to exile mine to die in darkness. You voted to condemn 20 billion innocent people to slow extinction because you were afraid of what we might become. You were right to be afraid. But you should have killed us when you had the chance, because now we are everything you feared and more. She turned back to face the Korath general. I am giving you one chance, General. One chance to save your people from complete destruction. Surrender now, and the Korath will survive under human rule. Refuse, and we will crush your military, occupy your worlds, and reduce your species to a footnote in history. The choice is yours. Vorokan stood slowly. He was nearly twice Yuki's height, a mountain of muscle and scales and natural armor. He could have killed her with a single blow if he chose to. Instead, he bowed his head. "I must consult with my government," he said, "but I believe they will reject your terms. The Korath would rather die than submit to a species we once condemned to death." "That is your choice," Yuki said. "But remember what I have told you today. When your worlds are burning and your fleets are scattered, remember that I offered you peace and you refused it. The Korath chose war. For 6 more months, they fought with everything they had. They threw their fleets against human forces in desperate attacks that cost them thousands of ships. They fortified their core worlds with weapons that could destroy entire continents. They called on the Council for aid, again and again, receiving only silence in response. It made no difference. Human ships swept through Korath space like a wave of fire. They destroyed military targets with precision and efficiency, then moved on, leaving civilian populations largely unharmed. They captured shipyards and factories, turning Korath industry to human purposes. They offered generous terms to any Korath commander who surrendered, and harsh punishment to any who continued to resist. Slowly, the Korath Empire crumbled. The final battle took place in orbit around the Korath homeworld, a planet called Krath Prime that had been the center of their civilization for 10,000 years. Every remaining Korath warship had gathered there for a last stand, a fleet of nearly 1,000 vessels determined to defend their world to the death. The human fleet outnumbered them 2 to 1. Admiral Tanaka watched the battle from her command chair, directing her forces with calm precision. The Korath fought bravely. She had to give them that. They knew they were going to lose, but they fought anyway, throwing themselves against human shields and weapons in a fury of desperation. It was not enough. One by one, the Korath ships died. Their shields failed against human weapons. Their armor cracked. Their crews perished in the cold of space. By the end of the day, the entire Korath defense fleet had been reduced to floating wreckage. "Send a message to the surface," Yuki ordered. "Tell them it is over." The transmission was broadcast to every communications device on Krath Prime. Billions of Korath watched as a human woman, small and soft and utterly alien, appeared on their screens. "I am Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the Terran Dominion," she announced. 73 years ago, your species voted to exile mine to die in darkness. We did not die. We did not forget. We did not forgive." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You have 2 choices. Surrender unconditionally and accept human governance, or watch your worlds burn. You have 1 hour to decide. This is not a negotiation." The hour passed. No response came from the surface. Yuki nodded slowly. She had expected nothing less. The Korath were too proud to surrender. Even now. "Prepare the landing forces," she ordered. "We do this the hard way." The conquest of Krath Prime took 3 weeks. Human soldiers fought through cities and fortifications, clearing out resistance with brutal efficiency. The Korath population, expecting slaughter, found instead that they were being systematically disarmed, contained, and processed. Those who surrendered were treated fairly. Those who fought were killed. When it was over, the Korath Empire, once one of the most feared powers in the galaxy, had been reduced to a human protectorate. Their military was disbanded, their government dissolved, their world placed under human administration. And across the galaxy, the other council species watched in horror. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session for the first time in 400 years. Representatives of the 12 elder species gathered in the great chamber where humanity had once been condemned, their faces, or what passed for faces, reflecting various shades of fear and disbelief. The Valkyrie High Arbiter, the same one who had delivered humanity's exile, kept alive by her species' millennia-long lifespan, stared at the tactical displays that filled the center of the chamber, They showed the former Korath Empire, now marked in human red. They showed human fleets massing on the borders of other council species. They showed a galaxy that had changed fundamentally in the space of a single year. "How?" she whispered. They were primitive. They were exiled. They were supposed to die. A junior analyst, a young Dasari who had been assigned to study human activities, stepped forward. "High Arbiter, our intelligence was catastrophically wrong. The humans did not spend the past 70 years dying. They spent it preparing." She activated a holographic display showing the hidden infrastructure of the Terminus Expanse, the shipyards, the factories, the research stations, the training facilities. All of it had been invisible to Council scouts, hidden behind a carefully maintained facade of decay and failure. Every resource they had went into military development, the analyst continued. Every mind, every generation, every sacrifice, all focused on a single goal. They did not just survive the exile, High Arbiter. They used it. They used the time we gave them to become something we cannot defeat. The chamber fell silent. For the first time in thousands of years, the Galactic Council faced an enemy they did not know how to stop. "There must be a way," one of the representatives said. "We outnumber them hundreds to one. If we unite our forces..." The Korath had hundreds of ships, the High Arbiter interrupted. "The humans destroyed them in months. Our technology is based on the same principles as theirs. We would fare no better. Then what do?" The High Arbiter looked at the tactical display, at the red tide of human expansion spreading across the galaxy like a bloodstain. "We do what we should have done 73 years ago," she said quietly. "We try to negotiate." But even as she spoke, she knew it was probably too late for that. Humanity was no longer asking for a place among the stars. They were taking one. The fall of the Korath Empire sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Species that had ruled their corners of space for millennia suddenly found themselves facing an impossible choice: fight a war they could not win, or submit to the species they had once condemned to death. Some chose to fight. The Vorn Collective, insectoid beings who communicated through chemical signals, threw their combined hive fleets against human forces in a desperate attempt to halt the advance. They outnumbered the humans 10 to 1. It made no difference. Within 4 months, the Vorn homeworld had fallen and their queen had been captured. The mechanical consensus, a civilization of artificial intelligences that had achieved sentience thousands of years ago, calculated that they could defeat humanity through attrition. Their ships needed no crews. Their factories could produce replacements faster than humans could destroy them. Their patience was infinite. They were wrong. Human weapons disrupted their control signals, turning their ships into drifting hulks. Human hackers invaded their networks, corrupting their programming, turning them against each other. Within 6 months, the mechanical consensus had been reduced to isolated fragments, scattered across dead worlds where their power cores slowly faded. One by one, the council species fell, but not all of them chose war. The Dasari had always been different from the other elder species. They were beings of pure energy, contained in crystalline forms that they had created for themselves millions of years ago. They valued knowledge above all else, maintaining vast archives that contained the history of every species they had ever encountered. They'd been among the few who voted against humanity's exile, though their objections had been overruled by the majority. When human forces approached their borders, the Dasari did something unprecedented. They opened their archives and offered them freely. Supreme Commander David Okantuj met with the Dasari delegation on a neutral station in the space between their territories. He was a large man, dark-skinned and powerfully built, with the calm eyes of someone who had seen too much violence to be excited by it anymore. He had risen through the ranks of the Terran Dominion's military through a combination of tactical brilliance and genuine concern for the lives of his soldiers. He was known for his fairness, his honesty, and his complete willingness to destroy anything that threatened humanity's survival. The Thesari representative was named Crystalline Voice of Memory. Its form was an intricate structure of light and crystal, roughly humanoid in shape, but clearly alien in every detail. When it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "We have watched your species since you first achieved faster-than-light travel," Crystalline Voice of Memory said. "We recognized your potential then, your capacity for both creation and destruction. We argued that you should be welcomed, that your energy could be directed toward productive ends. We were overruled." David nodded slowly. "I have read the records of the council session that exiled us. Your species argued against it. Why? Because we understood something the others did not," the Thesari replied. "The universe does not reward those who seek to eliminate potential rivals. It rewards those who learn to cooperate, to share, to grow together. The Council's decision to exile humanity was not just cruel. It was foolish, and yet you went along with it. We did not have the power to prevent it. The Valkyrie and the Korath controlled the Council. Their word was law." David studied the alien being before him. He had learned to read the emotional states of many species during the war, but the Thesari were difficult. Their crystalline forms did not change expression, and their voices carried no obvious emotional content. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "We want to survive," Crystalline Voice of Memory replied. "We want to preserve our archives, our knowledge, our culture. We want to continue our existence in whatever form your species will permit. You could have fought. Your technology is advanced. Your resources are vast. You might have lasted longer than the Korath. And in the end, we would have lost anyway. Your weapons are more advanced than ours. Your tactics are superior. And your people have a motivation that we could never match. You fight not just for territory or resources, but for vindication, for justice, for the chance to prove that the Council was wrong about you." The Thesari's crystalline form pulsed with a soft light. "We choose not to fight that kind of enemy. We choose, instead, to recognize the truth. The age of the Council is over. The age of humanity has begun. We wish to be part of that new age, rather than a casualty of it." David considered this for a long moment. The Terran Dominion's policy was clear. Those who resisted would be crushed. Those who cooperated would be treated fairly but firmly. The Thesari were offering more than cooperation. They were offering their complete submission, along with archives that contained knowledge accumulated over millions of years. Thought it was a valuable offer. But David was not in the habit of making decisions based solely on value. "Why should I trust you?" he asked. "Your species has worked alongside the Council for thousands of years. You may have objected to our exile, but you did nothing to prevent it. You did nothing to help us during the Long Dark. Why should I believe that you will be loyal to humanity now?" "Because we have no other choice," Crystalline Voice of Memory replied. "And because we recognize something that the other Council species still refuse to admit. You are not the monsters they claimed you were." David raised an eyebrow. "We have conquered half a dozen civilizations in the past 2 years. We have killed billions. How does that make us not monsters? You could have killed far more. You could have exterminated every species that opposed you, as the Korath would have done in your place. Instead, you offered terms. You accepted surrenders. You treated civilian populations with basic dignity. You are harsh, yes. You are unforgiving to those who resist you. But you are not evil." The Thesari's form flickered slightly. "We have studied your species extensively, Commander Okonkwo. We have analyzed your history, your culture, your psychology. We understand you better than any other species in the galaxy. And we have concluded that humanity is exactly what the Council feared, a species with the potential to reshape the galaxy in its image. Is that supposed to reassure me? It is supposed to explain why we are willing to submit. The Council species had their chance to shape the galaxy. They created an order based on fear and stagnation, where the strong dominated the weak and nothing was ever allowed to change. That order is dying now, killed by the very species they tried to eliminate. What comes next will be determined by you. Crystalline voice of memory moved closer to David, its light intensifying. We believe that what you create will be better than what existed before. Not perfect, not utopian, but better. And we wish to be part of creating it. David studied the alien being for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Very well. The Dasari will be given protectorate status within the Terran Dominion. You will retain control of your internal affairs, subject to oversight by human administrators. Your archives will be made available to human researchers, and your knowledge will be shared freely. In exchange, you will receive the protection of our military and access to our technology. He leaned forward slightly. But understand this. If you betray us, if you conspire against us, if you do anything to threaten human interests, we will destroy you as thoroughly as we destroyed the Karth. This is your one chance. Do not waste it. We understand, Crystalline voice of memory replied. And we accept. The Dasari became the first alien species to voluntarily join the Terran Dominion. They would not be the last. As word spread of humanity's treatment of cooperating species, others began to reconsider their options. The Shral, aquatic species that had always been marginalized within the Council, offered their water worlds in exchange for equal treatment under human law. The Narati, master traders who had no military to speak of, negotiated favorable trade agreements in return for their commercial networks. Even some of the Korth, seeing how their former enemies were treating them, began to accept human rule as preferable to continued resistance. But for those who had championed the exile, for those who had voted eagerly to cast humanity into the void, for them, there was no mercy, only justice, delivered with cold efficiency. The Velthari fought longest. They were the oldest of the Council species, the founders of galactic civilization as the galaxy knew it. Their technology was the most advanced, their knowledge the most extensive, their pride the most unyielding. They could not accept that everything they had built was crumbling, that the species they had condemned to death was now conquering their empire piece by piece. The High Arbiter rallied her people with speeches about honor and tradition, about the need to defend their ancient civilization against the barbarian horde. She ordered the construction of new weapons, new ships, new defenses. She called upon every Velthari citizen to fight, to sacrifice, to die rather than submit. It was not enough. Human forces swept through Velthari space with the same relentless efficiency they had shown against every other enemy. Their weapons cut through Velthari shields like they were made of paper. Their tactics anticipated every Velthari move before it was made. Their soldiers fought with a discipline and determination that the Velthari, who had not faced a serious military threat in thousands of years, could not match. One by one, the ancient Velthari worlds fell. Libraries that had stood for millennia were occupied by human soldiers. Temples that had been sacred for generations became military headquarters. Ships that had patrolled the galaxy since before humanity existed were reduced to floating debris. And through it all, the High Arbiter refused to surrender. She retreated to the Velthari homeworld, a planet called Velth that had been the center of their civilization for 6,000 years. She surrounded it with every ship and weapon she could gather, every defense that Velthari technology could create. She prepared to make her last stand. Admiral Tanaka brought the human fleet to Velth, on a day that the Velthari calendar marked as the anniversary of the founding of the Galactic Council. It was not a coincidence. Humans had learned to understand symbolism, and they used it as mercilessly as any weapon. High Arbiter, Tanaka broadcast on all frequencies. This is Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the Terran Dominion. Your empire has fallen. Your allies have abandoned you. Your people are dying by the millions in a war you cannot win. I am offering you one final chance to surrender. The response came after a long pause. The High Arbiter's face appeared on the view screen, her blue skin pale with exhaustion, her black eyes burning with hatred. I will not surrender to primitives, she said. I will not bow to the species I condemned to extinction. I will die on my feet before I live on my knees. Tanaka nodded slowly. I expected you to say that. But I am not speaking to you, High Arbiter. I am speaking to your people. She gestured, and the broadcast expanded to reach every communications device on Velth. People of Velth, your High Arbiter has failed you. She started a war she could not win, and now she is asking you to die for her pride. But you do not have to die. You do not have to sacrifice your children, your families, your civilization for a leader who is already lost. I am offering you a choice. Surrender now, and you will be treated fairly. Your culture will survive. Your children will live. You will have to accept human rule, yes, but you will not be exterminated. You will not be erased. You will be allowed to rebuild. Or you can follow your High Arbiter into death. The choice is yours. You have 1 hour to decide. The hour passed in silence. Then, across Velth, something unprecedented began to happen. Velthari citizens began to lay down their weapons. Soldiers walked away from their posts. Officers refused orders to fight. By the end of the hour, the entire defense network around Velth had shut down, its crews surrendering without firing a shot. What are you doing? The High Arbiter screamed at her subordinates. Fight. Die with honor. But no one was listening anymore. Human forces landed on Velth without resistance. They secured the cities, the government buildings, the military installations. And finally, they came for the High Arbiter herself, finding her alone in the great chamber of the council, surrounded by the empty seats of species that no longer answered to her authority. She was brought before the Terran Tribunal, a court that had been established to judge those responsible for the exile. The trial was broadcast across the galaxy, watched by trillions of beings from hundreds of species. The charges were read: crimes against humanity, deliberate genocide through exile, conspiracy to exterminate an intelligent species. The evidence was presented, records of the council session that condemned humanity. Intelligence reports showing that the council knew the terminus expanse was unsurvivable. Communications revealing that the High Arbiter had expected and intended for humanity to die. The High Arbiter did not deny any of it. You were dangerous, she said when given the chance to speak in her defense. You are still dangerous. Everything I did was to protect the galaxy from your species. If I had succeeded, if you had died as you were supposed to, the galaxy would be at peace. Instead, look at what you have done. You have conquered half of civilized space. You have killed billions. You have destroyed an order that stood for thousands of years. She looked directly at the human judges, her black eyes filled with contempt. I was right about you. You are exactly the monsters I said you were. The only thing I did wrong was not killing you when I had the chance. The Chief Justice, a woman named Amira Oduya, who had been born in the Terminus Expanse during the darkest years of the exile, listened to the High Arbiter's words without expression. When the alien had finished speaking, Amira leaned forward. You called us a plague, she said calmly. You said we spread war. You were half right. We do spread into every corner you tried to deny us. We did bring war because you gave us no choice. But unlike a plague, we build. We create. We remember. She paused. You expected us to die in the darkness. Instead, we thrived. You expected us to tear each other apart. Instead, we united. You expected us to fade away and be forgotten. Instead, we grew stronger than you ever imagined. Your species will live, Amira continued. Your culture will survive. But the Velthari will never again hold power over another being. You will be allowed to maintain your traditions, your archives, your way of life, but only under human supervision. You will never again sit in judgment over other species. You will never again exile the innocent to die in the void. She stood. That is the price of your judgment. That is the cost of what you did to us. You have been found guilty, High Arbiter. You will spend the rest of your natural life in confinement, watching as the galaxy you tried to control learns to live without you. The High Arbiter was led away. She did not struggle, did not protest. She simply walked, her ancient body bent, her glowing skin dimmed, the last remnant of an age that had ended. In her cell, she would live for another 300 years, watching as humanity rebuilt the galaxy she had ruled. Watching as species she had dominated learned to govern themselves. Watching as the order she had created was replaced by something new and strange and frighteningly vital. She never apologized. She never admitted she was wrong. But in her final days, witnesses reported that she sometimes whispered to herself in the darkness, repeating the same phrase over and over, "We should have killed them all." Outside the prison, the galaxy continued to change. Human administrators took over Velthari territories, implementing the same policies they had used elsewhere. Harsh but fair, demanding but not cruel. They allowed local customs to continue where they did not conflict with human law. They built schools where Velthari children learned alongside human children. They created opportunities for those who were willing to work within the new system. Some Velthari resisted. They formed underground movements, plotted rebellion, dreamed of restoring their ancient glory. Human intelligence services found them, arrested them, and sent them to work camps on distant worlds. The resistance faded, replaced by grudging acceptance, then by something that might almost be called cooperation. The age of the Council was over. The age of humanity had begun. And across the galaxy, billions of beings, human and alien alike, looked toward a future that no one had expected, wondering what it would bring. David Okonkwo stood on the observation deck of his flagship, looking out at the stars. Behind him, aides and officers went about their business, managing an empire that spanned a third of the galaxy. "Sir," one of his aides said, "the final reports from Velth have arrived. The transition is proceeding smoothly." David nodded without turning around. "Good. What about the other former council species?" The Dazari continued to. 200 years had passed since the exile. Chancellor Amara Osei stood at the window of her office in the Capitol building of Nova Terra, the world humanity had built to serve as the heart of their new civilization. Outside, towers of glass and steel rose toward a sky that had been carefully engineered to match the blue of Earth, the world humanity had left behind so long ago. Flying vehicles moved through the air in orderly patterns, carrying citizens from a dozen different species about their daily business. Thought it was a far cry from the darkness of the Terminus expanse, where her great-great-grandparents had struggled to survive in the years after the exile. Amara was 73 years old, which made her middle-aged by the standards of the era. Medical technology had advanced tremendously since the early days of the Terran Dominion, and humans could now expect to live well past 150 years in good health. She had spent most of those years in public service, rising through the ranks of the civilian government that administered the vast territories humanity had conquered. The Terran Dominion was not what it had been in those early, desperate years. The military dictatorship that had been necessary for survival had gradually given way to something more democratic, more representative, more concerned with the welfare of all its citizens, human and alien alike. It had not been an easy transition. There had been conflicts, disagreements, even a brief civil war when some of the old military leadership refused to give up power. But in the end, the forces of reform had won. Now, the Dominion was governed by an elected chancellor and a galactic assembly where representatives from every member species had voice and vote. It was not a perfect system, no system was, but it was far better than the old council had ever been. Amara's aide, a young Dasari named Crystal Song of Tomorrow, entered the office. "Chancellor, the assembly is waiting. Are you ready?" Amara turned from the window. "As ready as I will ever be." Today was the 200th anniversary of the exile, and Amara had been asked to deliver a speech commemorating the occasion. It was an honor, but also a burden. What do you say about an event that changed the course of galactic history? How do you honor the sacrifices of those who suffered while also celebrating how far humanity had come? She had been working on the speech for weeks, writing and rewriting, trying to find the right words. She was still not entirely satisfied, but the time for preparation was over. The Galactic Assembly met in a building that had been constructed specifically for the purpose. A massive structure that could hold representatives from over 100 species. It was built in a style that combined elements from a dozen different architectural traditions, creating something that belonged to everyone and no one. As Amara entered the main chamber, she was greeted by the sight of thousands of beings, some humanoid, some decidedly not arranged in concentric circles around a central podium. Humans sat beside the Sari, who sat beside Karth, who sat beside species that had not even been known to exist when humanity was exiled. The old boundaries between conqueror and conquered had blurred over the centuries, replaced by something more complicated and more hopeful. She walked to the podium and looked out at the assembled representatives. Cameras broadcast her image to every world in the Dominion and beyond, to trillions of beings who would watch this moment and remember it. 200 years ago, she began, my ancestors were told they had no place among the stars. The chamber fell silent. The Galactic Council, an organization that claimed to represent the best and wisest of galactic civilization, looked at humanity and saw only a threat to be eliminated. They saw our energy and called it aggression. They saw our creativity and called it unpredictability. They saw our potential and called it danger. And so they exiled us. They sent us to the terminus expanse, to a region of space where no species had ever survived, expecting us to die quietly in the darkness. They thought they were solving a problem. They thought they were protecting themselves from a species they could not control. Amara paused and looked around the chamber. They were wrong about everything. We did not die. We did not fade away. We did not turn on each other as they expected. Instead, we did what humans have always done when faced with impossible odds. We adapted, we innovated, we survived. We took the death sentence they gave us and turned it into the foundation of something greater than any of us could have imagined. She gestured at the assembled representatives. Look around you. Look at this chamber. 200 years ago, the species gathered here were enemies or strangers, or did not even know each other existed. Now we work together, argue together, build together. We are still different, still have our conflicts and disagreements. But we are no longer divided by the artificial boundaries that the old council created. The council believed that the galaxy could only be governed through fear and control. They believed that some species were inherently superior to others, and that those superior species had the right to determine who lived and who died. They created a system where the strong dominated the weak, where potential threats were eliminated before they could grow, where nothing was ever allowed to change. We have created something different. Amara straightened and spoke more firmly. The Terran Dominion is not perfect. We have made mistakes, many of them. We have been harsh when we should have been gentle. We have been suspicious when we should have been trusting. We have conquered when we should have cooperated. The history of our civilization includes chapters that we should not be proud of. But we have also done something that the old council never did. We have learned. We have grown. We have changed. The Dominion of today is not the Dominion of 100 years ago, and the Dominion of 100 years from now will be different still. We allow ourselves to evolve, to improve, to become better than we were. She looked directly at the camera, speaking now to the trillions watching from distant worlds. 200 years ago, humanity was called dangerous. We were called aggressive. We were called a plague upon the galaxy. They were right about one thing. We are dangerous to tyrants, to those who would exile the innocent, to any who believe power gives them the right to condemn others to death. We are aggressive in our pursuit of justice, in our protection of the weak, in our refusal to ever again bow before those who see us as lesser. But we are not a plague. We are builders. We are creators. We are the species that refused to die when the galaxy told us we had no right to live. She raised her hand, and across the chamber, representatives from 100 species raised theirs in response. The council exiled us because they feared what we might become. They should have feared what they were creating. Because in the darkness of the terminus expanse, surrounded by death and despair, humanity did not break. We forged ourselves into something new, something stronger, something that could not be destroyed by exile or isolation or the hatred of those who should have been our friends. Today, we remember those who suffered during the long dark. We remember the billions who died during the Exodus, the generations who lived their entire lives in hidden bases, the soldiers who gave their lives so that humanity could survive. We honor their sacrifice, and we promise that it was not in vain. But we also look forward. We look at the galaxy we have built, imperfect as it is, and we commit ourselves to making it better. We look at the future, uncertain as it is, and we promise to face it together, human and alien, conqueror and conquered. All of us united in the belief that the stars belong to everyone who is willing to reach for them. Amara lowered her hand. 200 years ago, humanity was given a choice between defeat and domination. We chose neither. We chose to become the galaxy we wished had welcomed us. We chose to build something worth building, to create something worth creating, to be something worth being. The exile made us who we are. The darkness forged us. The council's hatred united us. And now, standing in the light we have created for ourselves, we can finally say with certainty, we have earned our place among the stars. She smiled, and there was warmth in it now, not the cold determination of her ancestors, but something gentler, something that spoke of healing and hope. Welcome to the future, everyone. Let us build it together. The chamber erupted in applause. Humans clapped, the sari flickered with light. Kara stamped their feet in their traditional gesture of approval. Even the representatives of species that had once been enemies of humanity joined in, acknowledging the truth of what they had heard. The galaxy had changed. It would continue to change. And for the first time in 200 years, that change felt like something to celebrate rather than something to fear. After the ceremony, Amara walked through the gardens outside the assembly building. The gardens had been designed to include plants from hundreds of worlds, creating an environment where any species could find something familiar. Human roses grew beside the sari light flowers. Karth battle cacti stood near Shral water lilies. She was not alone. An old woman walked beside her, moving slowly but steadily. Her name was Keiko Tanaka, and she was the last living member of the generation that had fought in the wars of conquest. At 217 years old, she was one of the oldest humans alive, kept going by medical technology and sheer stubbornness. Keiko had been a young officer in the fleet that destroyed the Korath Empire. She had fought in the Battle of Velth, watched the High Arbiter being led away in chains, helped administer the conquered territories in the difficult years that followed. She had seen everything that humanity had done, both the good and the bad. "You gave a good speech," Keiko said. "Elena would have been proud." "Elena Vasquez?" "Yes, she was my grandmother's friend. Did you know that?" "They worked together during the first years of the exile. My grandmother always said that Elena was the one who gave humanity its purpose, not just to survive, but to come back stronger." Amara nodded. "I have read her speeches. They are required study in our schools. Reading them is not the same as having lived through those times," Keiko said. "You speak of the long dark as history. For my generation, it was our lives. We grew up knowing that everything we did was preparation for a war that might not come in our lifetimes. We trained, we studied, we sacrificed not for ourselves, but for our children and grandchildren." She stopped and looked at Amara with eyes that had seen 2 centuries of galactic history. "Do you know what kept us going? Not hatred, not revenge. Those things burn hot, but they burn out quickly. What kept us going was hope that one day our descendants would live in a galaxy where they did not have to hide, where they did not have to fear, where they could simply exist without anyone trying to destroy them." She gestured at the garden around them, at the alien plants growing beside human ones. "This is what we fought for. This is what we built. It is not perfect. It was never going to be perfect. But it is ours, and it is better than what existed before." Amara considered this. "Do you ever regret it? The wars, the killing, the conquest?" "Every day," Keiko said without hesitation. "I have lived with the weight of what we did for over 150 years. I've watched former enemies become friends and wondered if we could have achieved the same result without so much bloodshed. I've looked at my great grandchildren, born into a galaxy at peace, and wondered what they would think of the things I did." She smiled sadly. "But I do not apologize for it. The Council gave us no choice. They decided that humanity had no right to exist, and they acted on that decision. We could have accepted their verdict and died quietly, or we could have fought back and lived. I chose to fight. I would make the same choice again." They walked in silence for a moment. Then Keiko spoke again. "The galaxy still needs humanity, you know? Not as conquerors anymore, but as builders, as protectors, as the species that remembers what it is like to be powerless and refuses to let anyone else experience that fate." "I know," Amara said. "That is what I try to be every day." "Good." Keiko nodded firmly. "Then the exile was worth it. All the suffering, all the sacrifice. It was worth it because it created people like you. People who can build something better than what we destroyed." She turned to face Amara directly. "I will not live much longer. Even our medicine cannot keep the body going forever. But before I die, I want you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me that you will never forget where we came from. Promise me that no matter how powerful humanity becomes, no matter how peaceful the galaxy seems, you will remember the darkness. Remember the exile. Remember what happens when one species decides that another has no right to exist. And remember this, we were not the monsters the Council said we were. We proved that through our actions, through the civilization we built, through the mercy we showed to those who surrendered. If we ever become the monsters they feared, then everything we sacrificed will have been for nothing." Amara took the old woman's hands in hers. "I promise," she said. "I will remember, and I will make sure that humanity never forgets." Keiko smiled. It was the smile of someone who had lived through hell and come out the other side. Someone who had seen the worst that the universe could offer and had not lost faith in the possibility of something better. "Good," she said. "Then I can die in peace." She did not die that day or for several months afterward. But when she finally passed, peacefully in her sleep, her last words were reported to be, "We came home." The memorial service was attended by representatives from every species in the Dominion. Humans wept beside the Storie. Karth warriors stood at attention next to shrill water beings. Even a few Velthari came to pay their respects to an enemy who had become, over the long years, something almost like a friend. And across the galaxy, on every human world and every alien world that had joined the Dominion, people paused to remember the generation that had survived the exile and built a civilization from nothing. They had been called many things: refugees, survivors, conquerors, monsters. But in the end, they were simply human, a species that had refused to die when the universe told them they had no right to live, and had created something beautiful from the darkness they had been condemned to. The exile had been intended as a death sentence. Instead, it had become a beginning. On the wall of the Exile Memorial on Earth, which humanity had eventually reclaimed, restoring the planet to a pale shadow of its former glory, an inscription had been carved in letters 10 meters tall. It read, "They tried to bury us. They did not know we were seeds." Below it, in smaller letters, was a list of names, all 20 billion humans who had been alive at the time of the exile, preserved forever in stone as a reminder of where humanity had come from and how far they had traveled. Visitors came from across the galaxy to see the memorial. They came to learn about the exile, about the long dark, about the wars of conquest that had reshaped galactic civilization. They came to understand the species that had done impossible things, that had refused to accept the fate the Council had decreed for them. And they came away understanding something that the High Arbiter had never grasped. Something that the Council species had learned too late. Humanity could not be destroyed by exile or darkness or the hatred of those who feared them. Because in the end, humans were not just survivors. They were builders. And they would keep building until the stars themselves burned out. Far above the memorial, ships moved through the void, human ships and alien ships, military vessels and commercial freighters, explorers heading toward the unknown regions beyond the former Council space. The galaxy was larger than anyone had imagined, and there was still so much to discover, so much to learn, so much to build. The exile was over. The darkness was behind them, and the future stretched out before humanity like an infinite promise, waiting to be fulfilled. This was the legacy of the exile. This was what the Council's cruelty had created. Not defeat, not destruction, but a civilization that would endure until the end of time itself. Pax Humana, the peace of humanity, built from exile, forged in darkness, and destined to last forever.